Hi, everybody. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you may be joining us. My name is Matt, and first want to say thank you so much for signing up for today's webinar. We're really excited for today's topic. We've got some great hosts for you guys today, so I just wanted to say thanks for choosing to spend your hour with Provider Trust. So a little bit about your presenters today. On the left, you have Dave Servadidio. He's our Director of Marketing. He's been working at Provider Trust for almost 6 years and has a lot of experience talking with compliance and HR professionals about their processes. And he's just a great person to have on the call today. He has great insights into the Johns Hopkins article. So great to have him today. On the right, we have Christina Starr. She's our Director of Operations for the marketing team. And she has just as much experience, if not more than Dave, with talking to folks like you about helping you and making your job easier. So that's just a little bit about the two people presenting today. And our topic is how exclusion monitoring can better protect patients. A little bit about us before we start. We are located here in Nashville, Tennessee. We are a software as a service company. We have partners across the nation. We really just help long-term care facilities, hospital systems, health plans, and the HR compliance professionals within them really streamline their processes and make their lives better. At Provider Trust, we believe that a smarter healthcare makes a safer healthcare, and we live this out by monitoring healthcare populations to identify compliance and credential issues before they impact patients. So here at Provider Trust, actually one of our core values is to help others grow and succeed. And we really take a lot of pride in doing this through webinars being one example, but we have a vast library of resources, 300 plus, that I know you guys would find valuable, and just scroll around on the website and you'll find some great topics, some great stuff for you guys to check out. But yeah, we believe that helping others grow and succeed by providing helpful resources for healthcare compliance and HR professionals. So thanks for being here today. A little bit about our past webinars. If this is your last one of the year for Provider Trust, it is our last webinar, but these are our the last three that you can see on our website, as well as the entire 2019 library. So just check those out if those seem interesting to you. A little bit about today's agenda. We'll start with the current state of the exclusion and then move into the current state of exclusion monitoring category, and then to understanding the impacted patient profile, followed by how is exclusion monitoring connected to patient safety, and then finally we'll wrap it up with best practices for payers and providers in 2020. So with that, I will pass it over to Dave to talk to us a little bit about understanding the exclusion.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We're super excited to have everybody here on the call today. Thanks again for spending the time with us. We really, really appreciate it. And we're really excited about this session today. Just a couple quick things before we get rolling. Certainly encourage participation and questions along the way. So if you would, you'll notice in your GoToWebinar side panel, please go ahead and ask questions and type them in. We will be sure to respond after the session today to every single person that asks a question along the way. So please don't hesitate to reach out and ask us whatever you'd like. Secondly, what prompted today's webinar, this is going to be a little bit of a different session if you're used to our content and you're used to coming on a monthly basis. This is a little bit different. We always talk about business processes and how to really empower a smarter healthcare operation, both on the provider and the payer side. But wanted to close the year for us in our content journey and really talk a little bit about if we do all of these things and we make healthcare smarter and we actually achieve that goal, how does that actually impact the patient? And super excited to share some of the recent data published this year on the connection between excluded providers and the beneficiaries that actually receive the care from excluded providers, and talk a little bit about fraud. It's really interesting stuff, and it's a lot of what we talk about from a brand perspective. So excited to have you on the call. And then super excited to have Christina Starr here with us as well. This is actually her first webinar with Provider Trust, and she's just the perfect person to take us through some of the insights along the way. So without further ado, Christina, take us through the exclusion.
Thanks, Dave. So fraud, waste, and abuse is a national problem across the healthcare continuum. In fact, estimates show that anywhere from 3 to 10% of the nation's healthcare spending can be attributed to healthcare fraud. In 2018, total US healthcare spend was $3.65 trillion, which means that an estimated $365 billion was wasted on healthcare fraud. Some of the most common examples of healthcare fraud are phantom billing for unnecessary tests or procedures that were never performed, upcoding or billing for more expensive supplies or procedures than were actually ordered or performed, excessive billing for more than 24 hours of services in one day, and fake billing companies such as phony pharmacies that disappear after collecting reimbursement. Where do exclusions start? So if you've been in a Provider Trust webinar before, or you've interacted with our brand, you probably know what an exclusion is, but we're going to do just a little refresh here to make sure that everyone's on the same page and kind of level set, starting with where an exclusion starts. So some of the most common places are at the state level. The Medicaid Fraud Control Unit reports a new provider or business that's been excluded, and that either stays on the state list or gets reported up to the OIG. One incredibly common place that exclusions start is at a license issue. In fact, almost 43% of all OIG exclusions start with a licensure issue with a sanction or a disciplinary action. There's criminal activity that can be the reason an exclusion starts, with a healthcare-related misdemeanor action or felony action. And then one of the lesser known reasons is actually defaulting on a student loan. This is less common, but we do see it in our world. What sources do I need to check for exclusions? There are 45 lists at a minimum that need ongoing monitoring. And by ongoing monitoring, we mean monthly at a minimum. Those lists are the OIG LEIE, SAM, which is formerly known as EPLS and GSA, and then there are 43 state Medicaid exclusion lists. But that's not all. There are several other lists depending on population that should be checked. For example, if you have a large provider network, we say that you need to monitor the Medicare opt-out list. And if you are a health plan doing member screening, you need to screen those members against the SSA DMF list.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Christina. And we thought it was just really important to anchor us all to some common definitions of exclusions before digging into the impact that they may or may not have on actual patients. And so last slide on this is this current state of the exclusion. Always worth, we update this and we often present it both in webinars and just normal client presentations, but it's always a good anchor point to just say, what is this universe of exclusions that lives out there and what do I need to be aware of? So there are currently 72,293 current active exclusions on the OIG LEIE. There are also 69,919 current active exclusions in SAM's data set. And there are also, if you combine all of the state Medicaid exclusion lists, there are an additional 70,427 current active exclusions. That brings us to a universe of about 212,609 total unique healthcare exclusions that we are all responsible for understanding how to interact with and monitor on an ongoing basis. Christina mentioned this before, but about 43% of all OIG exclusions are related to license revocation specifically. States are required to report exclusions to the OIG in 30 days. but we see the actual average time is actually about 173 days, and it really varies. Some state lists are really good about reporting within a month or so. Some state lists don't report at all. So all of that is factored into what that actual average time is. And then 50% of all exclusions actually never show up on the OIG LEIE at all. And we see this all the time of an exclusion that just lives on in perpetuity on a state Medicaid list and never makes it to any federal data set. That's a really common story. We see it all the time with our clients, just in the industry as well. So moving forward, wanted to spend just one slide on understanding the category of exclusion monitoring. So we consider ourselves category leaders of, and really category starters of this just ongoing monitoring and healthcare data. And what does that actually look like? And so wanted to actually tell a story along the way to anchor you to kind of where this came from in the world of exclusions. So the story of the exclusion monitoring category starts like this. Once upon a time, the ACA and the OIG made it a requirement to check populations for exclusions or risk huge penalty, all in an effort to crack down on the system's problems of fraud, waste, and abuse. And every day, HR and compliance teams struggled to keep up with manual, extensive checking of their populations against the LEIE in an Excel spreadsheet at best, and at worst, doing so directly at the LEIE's website, working super hard to verify any potential issues before the next month starts to maintain compliance as best they could. And that was current state for a long time, until one day, we, Provider Trust, introduced the concept of automated, ongoing, continuous exclusion monitoring with exact match results to the marketplace, delivering from freedom from complex process to focus on people and care. And that really birthed the category, right? So because of that, a category was born. Hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, health plans alike realized that the right technology partner could simplify their process and save them time. And a slew of tech startups followed, creating the industry of exclusion monitoring and giving the market the freedom to choose. And that's the market that we've seen evolve over time too. Because of that, the concept of ongoing monitoring in healthcare took off, expanding to various segments, inclusive of different artifacts, such as licensure boards of the OFAC list, and certainly scope of partnership as well, until finally, Provider Trust started to tell the story of how data is the key to spot issues no one else can, given what's at the primary source on all of these lists, connecting smarter data directly to an ability to protect the patients that need it the most, to create a safer healthcare for everyone. That's the state of the exclusion monitoring category today, and the story of how we got where we are, which explains why we're talking about the thing that we are today, which is really connecting exclusion monitoring, the process, back to patients and the safety that they deserve. We're excited to share the next chapter of data in that story today on this webinar. So let's talk a little bit about protecting healthcare's most vulnerable, understanding the demographic profile of a patient treated by an excluded provider. And this is why we do what we do, friends. This is why Provider Trust exists, is to create a safer healthcare for everyone. And when we talk about everyone, it's critical to understand who that includes, which is healthcare's most vulnerable individuals. So what prompted us to start talking about this, a recent study from Johns Hopkins, they published in May 1st of 2019, so this year, just a few months ago, in the Journal of Health Affairs, Project Hope. Since then, there's been widespread industry reaction and discussion since publication on Medicare fraud, waste, and abuse prevention and exclusions. We've actually included a link to the primary source study if you're interested. I promise you, it's actually a really interesting read and a really quick one too. It's not super technical, and it's not super wordy. It's actually very clear, concise, and pretty short. And it's a really good read. And what they found really in a nutshell is they analyzed excluded providers over the course of several years as it relates to Medicare beneficiaries specifically. and started to track the results of what were these excluded providers actually treating for, who were they treating, what did these patients actually look like, what was their demographic record, what kind of diagnosis did they have, and how can you actually draw some patterns and correlations to help better predict, analyze, and maybe even prevent fraud, waste, and abuse in healthcare. It's really a monumental study, and it's an awesome piece of work. Would highly recommend taking the time to just go ahead and read through it. And so here's some of the insights that came out of that study. So in the period of 2012 to 2015, 1,364 excluded providers treated over 1.2 million Medicare beneficiaries and received more than $630 million in Medicare payments. That is the scope of the study and the scope of the data that we have to go back and look at to start telling the story of how a smarter healthcare might be able to make a safer healthcare. And so digging a little bit deeper, in 1 year, here are some of the numbers that really stuck out to us from this study. So in 1 year, how many patients does an excluded provider treat? The answer to that question is 333. Almost one patient a day is treated by an excluded provider. How many services does an excluded provider deliver per patient? That answer is 24, which is incredibly alarming. So 24 services provided and billed for directly by an excluded provider to Medicare on care delivered per patient. How much money does an excluded provider receive from Medicare? That answer is $168,000. Just a little north of that, which again is just alarming. If you think about the dollars that add up to fraud, waste, and abuse that's lost over the course of just 1 year. And then what's the average payment per patient to an excluded provider? And that's $500, right? So per patient, an out-of-pocket cost or a cost through Medicare is $500 to an excluded provider every single time of service on average, right? Pretty alarming numbers when you think about the financial impact to the patients that we protect. And then if you start to dig in deeper, this is really where we start to say, when we tell the story of creating a safer healthcare for everyone, we really start to look at who is the patient that receives care from an excluded provider, who's included in everyone. And that may sound like a silly question, but it's imperative to understand the demographics of the people that actually make up who's being impacted the most by fraud, waste, and abuse in healthcare. And so on average, the patient that is impacted and treated by an excluded provider is more likely than not to be non-white. They are more likely than not to be disabled. They are more likely than not to be under 65, and they are more likely than not to be dual enrolled in Medicaid. Right? Again, if you start to put together the picture and the profile of the human being that's treated by an excluded provider, this is what that person looks like. And even going a little bit deeper is understanding the patterns of ethnicity and race within healthcare. And the reality is that Medicare patients treated by excluded providers are more likely to be, again, we said non-white, but specifically Black, Hispanic, Asian, or any other minority group instead of white. And finally, analyzing the medical diagnosis specifically. So Medicare patients treated by excluded providers are more likely to be diagnosed with depression, chronic kidney disease, diabetes, or heart disease, right? And so I come back to this word and say safer. And it's what we've actually staked our brand on, and what we're so passionate about going out and telling this story to the marketplace is that creating a safer healthcare for everyone means understanding who's impacted the most and giving the human beings a voice to actually visualize who's being taken advantage of in healthcare when it relates to fraud, waste, and abuse, and then even more specifically to Medicare spending and the concept of exclusion monitoring. It's a critical piece to our story, and one that we're so passionate about sharing with people just like you all. Friends, your work matters in compliance and in HR, and if you're working for a health plan, you are interacting. If you're on this webinar, you certainly interact with the concept of exclusions, and we hope you feel empowered after hearing a story like this to say, the work that you do on a daily basis, just like us, helps protect the people that I've just detailed. So thank you for doing that work. And so finally, we talk about how can smarter exclusion monitoring impact patient safety, and what does that look like? And so the key word here is actually smarter. And we talk about this a lot, right? We outline the safer, and then we'll start with how to make your process smarter so that you can make healthcare safer. And that's a core pillar of our brand promise. And so really when we say smarter, it all comes back to primary source data, the actual sources behind that, and what you can find in healthcare that's publicly available and how to enhance that over time. And so as an example, here is what primary source exclusion data looks like. Here's a real snapshot, it's literally just a screenshot from the Alabama state exclusion list. And you can see there's not a whole lot of detail at the primary source to be able to catch, identify, and even verify whether or not the first line, John B. Abel, is the same John B. Abel that works for your organization or is part of your provider network, or is not, and it's some other person completely. There's not a lot of detail provided, and we see the differences and the nuances in how each of these exclusion lists make it so difficult to actually do that identification and verification work. And so here's just a real example of what this actually looks like. And we say this all the time, the differences in the data. Here's a real life example from one of our partner clients that's a health plan, and what we actually mean on how do you verify data that might be different. So on the very left, here's a real data record from a partner of ours. It's a health plan. They gave us the data of Lawrence Feldman. They gave us a location address, which is in Boynton Beach, Florida. They gave us a billing address, which is in Boca Raton, Florida, a date of birth, an NPI number. They did not give us a social security number. They told us the network status. So this is a PAR provider, in a participating provider in this health plan's provider network. And year-to-date claims paid within the Medicare line of business was just shy of $50,000 for in full year 2017. At the primary source, this is a real exclusion that exists on the Maryland state Medicaid list. The name is the same, Lawrence Feldman, but the address published at the primary source is Westminster, Maryland, with an exclusion date. There is no additional data points on the primary source that would allow you to connect back and actually verify whether or not it's the same Lawrence Feldman that's part of this health plan's provider network. Also worth pointing out that even though the health plan gave us two addresses, both of them are in different cities in Florida, the exclusion is from Maryland, right? So friends, we know what happened. There's an exclusion, and Lawrence moved to Florida and began and enrolled and went through credentialing and became a participating provider at a different health plan in a different state, continuing to build Medicaid, Medicare, and even commercial lines of business. Here's a little bit about what we mean when we say make it smarter. Is provider trust you see on the right. We take primary source exclusion data and we add unique identifiers to catch things that no one else can. In this case, we added the NPI number to this Maryland state Medicaid exclusion record, and that allowed us, just based on NPI alone, to connect this health plan's provider with an exclusion record using data that's actually not on the primary source. And we're able to deliver that instantly in real time at time of claim to this health plan in this particular workflow to help prevent additional monies from going out the door and prevent recoupment later. It's a big part of what we mean when we say make healthcare smarter, is to say, how do you use a data strategy to actually catch fraud, identify fraud, verify fraud, and deliver it back in an actionable way. And again, here's just another example too that's more provider facing, is we often look at time that it takes to do this activity. To check 1,000 providers monthly, here's our estimate in terms of how much time this actually takes. And so locate, download all exclusion lists every time they're updated takes roughly 8 hours a month from 43 state Medicaid lists and the 2 federal sources. Converting all of these exclusion lists into a searchable format. It takes about 4 hours a month. Search every provider, employee, or vendor by unique combination of identifiers. We've estimated takes about 5 minutes per provider or vendor a month, about 84 hours. And again, we're keeping the scope to this example for a 1,000 providers or employees on a monthly basis. Search each provider or vendor by nickname and possible misspellings is an additional 10 minutes per provider or vendor. And then verify any potential matches is about 5 minutes per provider or vendor. So we actually say this takes about 347 hours per month, and roughly equating that to just over 2 full-time employees to check just 1,000 providers a month. So think about how big your provider networks are, how big your health plans are, or how many employees you actually have, and kind of multiply that out to see, to do this well and to do this expertly, here's actually what this takes, which requires an investment from you guys. And when doing it well at scale, here's about what we see. So protecting a 750,000 provider network. Before, this is, again, full disclosure, this is a client of ours that uses some of our data strategies. But just to tell the story of when you have a data strategy, here's some of the results that you can see. Manually checking the OIG against provider population on a monthly basis with finding no confirmed exclusions on a monthly. Now, since activating within their first just several months, I believe this statistic is within the first 3 months alone, we found over 1,500 exclusions across federal and state lists, and on average continue to find about 28 exclusions every week on average. Some weeks it's less, some weeks it's more, but what that's led to is significantly reduced recruitment costs while increasing operational efficiencies, certainly leading to ROI. That's what we mean by actually making and creating a smarter healthcare system. And then finally, to put real dollars associated with this to you and what smarter can actually mean. Here's the results of a real-time instant screen against a provider network and really integrating with a claim system to say, at time of claim, can you move your compliance upstream to better identify how to keep people safe? So in a real-time screen, we looked at a population of about 144,000 providers. Again, this is a health plan example. It's in a provider network example. That roughly equated to $1.46 billion in claims for this particular health plan. In an instant real-time screen, within seconds, we flagged about 3,000 providers that represented about $14 million in claims. Again, this is just one health plan alone. When we look back at that data for fraud, waste, and abuse, it was $630 million over the course of 4 years in the study. And in doing so in real time for one health plan, we're already identifying $14 million. It shows you that a data strategy is critical to understanding how to catch fraud, identify it, verify it, deliver it back in an actionable format. And so breaking that 3,000 number up, 416 of those were excluded providers, which represented about $1.76 million in claims. Again, this is Medicare. 1,600 of those were inactive NPI numbers, just shy of $10 million in claims. 911 were on the opt-out list, which is about $2 million in claims, and 36 were invalid NPIs, which was about 430,000 of those claims. So digging a little deeper into the exclusions, because that's certainly the topic of today's session, 288 of those were current active exclusions that represented $721,000. Again, just claims from 1 year from one health plan. 134 of those were reinstatements, but represented a sizable amount of claims dollars. And then one waiver, which was $227,000 as well, that was contained there. And then again, here's where smarter data actually comes into play. Within the 288 current exclusions, 171 of those were primary source matched. So based on what the data the health plan gave us and what the data that was found directly on the primary source with no enhancing and no strategy other than just comparing A to B, we're able to identify and verify 171 of those that represent $420,000 in claims. But based on what the health plan gave us and how we had to augment or enhance primary source data, we were able to catch 117 exclusions based on smarter data alone and a better data verification process that the health plan was unable to catch on their own. That represented an additional $300,000 in claims. That's putting, just an example of putting real dollars in reality in terms of how a health plan might operate or how that connects back to delivery of care at a provider organization. And that data really is the key to unlocking how to identify and verify fraud and how to keep people safe. And you can extrapolate out going back to who is the patient impacted by fraud, waste, and abuse in healthcare. If you extrapolate out that data and connect back even just the 117 that are caught with smarter data, if you start running out the math and multiplying by how many times those providers see patients in a year, or what's the average payment per provider per year, all of a sudden the sunk cost of fraud, waste, and abuse in healthcare, even just within this specific example, goes up astronomically. It's a powerful example, and it's an example of how using data and in the right places in your workflow can keep people safe. And so we'll wrap it up today and close with just best practices and recommendations as you go into 2020, right? So the category of exclusion monitoring is changing rapidly. We know that, and we've broken this up into how would we recommend your takeaways from this session. If you are a provider organization, like a health system or a long-term care system, or a payer organization, a large health plan that interacts with Medicare or Medicaid dollars on an ongoing basis. So Christina, take it away with providers.
Thanks, Dave. How can provider orgs be successful in 2020, especially given the topic that we're talking about in keeping patients safe? If you've ever interacted with Provider Trust brand, you've been to one of our webinars, you've seen us at a conference, you've been on our website, you know that our stance as a company is that the best way to do this is to align your HR and compliance teams, processes, and strategy. There's so much overlap within the two, and aligning these is going to help keep patients safe. So HR and compliance collaboration, why does it make so much sense? Well, we think that, it's a natural partnership. We've spoken with people in HR departments and compliance departments who have told us that in today's day and age, there's more collaboration between the two departments than there ever has been. Most people issues require both HR and compliance expertise, and both involve people and affect people. So the two departments are working hand in hand. But specifically, how do these functions overlap? So on the left here, we have some standard typical processes that fall within human resources: payroll, benefits, recruitment, training and onboarding, retention, and disciplinary actions. If you're on the call and you sit in a seat that is in an HR department, these probably feel very familiar to you. You wake up and think about these things every single day. On the right is compliance processes. We've got regulatory updates, policy and procedure review, audits, code of conduct, federal and state reporting, risk assessment, and HIPAA. As I just said earlier, if you're on the compliance side of things, this probably feels very familiar to you. But what we've found in the market and what we've heard from our HR and compliance, friends, is that there is a convergence happening in the marketplace. This is where HR and compliance come together to oversee processes: license management, exclusion monitoring, hotline investigations, monitoring consistent disciplinary actions, retaliation investigations. These are all processes that both teams are working on. They all involve people and affect people. So going into 2020, maybe one of your goals is to have further collaboration between your human resources and compliance teams. What steps can you actually take to achieve this collaboration? Well, first of all, you can define roles and responsibilities for each department. You can identify overlap and duplicity within your teams. You can identify areas of risk that should or could be monitored. And then define a cadence for communication, whether that's weekly, monthly or quarterly, the two teams should be meeting and talking to each other. Because we like to leave you with a takeaway, on the next slide, we have questions for you to use to start evaluating and understanding your current processes. So the first question is, how often do you screen your providers, employees, or third parties for exclusions or disciplinary actions? Next, you should look at how accurate is your provider credential information? Have your employees gotten married and changed their names? Have they moved outside of a compact license state and updated their license? Third, how are credential concerns communicated across teams? How quickly does this occur? Fourth, are there regular cross-functional meetings about employee monitoring best practices? After the webinar, we recommend using these questions as a starting point to help achieve HR and compliance collaboration with the ultimate goal of keeping patients safe. And if you're feeling lost or overwhelmed by this process, Provider Trust is here to help. Now I'll turn it back over to Dave to wrap us up with what success looks like for payers in 2020.
Awesome. Thanks, Christina. So just to recap, success for providers looks like connecting your HR and compliance teams, processes, and strategy in 2020. But for payers, it's a little bit different. It's moving in 2020. What success looks like is moving real-time provider compliance monitoring upstream and into the workflows that can keep people safest. And so really, when we say that, we're saying understanding the provider life cycle is the first part of this. And so when you look at it that way, you say enrollment, a provider first enrolls in a health plan, they then go through contracting, they then go into credentialing, they then become part of a participating provider within the network. They then submit claims and get paid. And then should there be any issues, certainly that becomes a compliance issue and goes to SIU and recruitment to recover the funds. And that cycle just kind of starts over and over again as they go through the recredentialing process and then are back in the network, right? What we actually see is at every single step of the workflow and the life cycle that you see on your screen is where real-time compliance monitoring can and we'd offer and we'd position that should be included and integrated into every step of this workflow. So from enrollment into contracting, into credentialing, into monitoring on an ongoing basis your PAR network, at time of claim, and then at the back end and helping with investigations to make sure you can quickly recover when need to as fast as possible. Every step of that journey involves smarter exclusion monitoring and smarter data. And that's the way to keep people safe, is to connect it all the way through. And we love this quote. This is one that we use all the time. And it's really our point of view as it relates to the health plan space, which is connecting prepay with post-pay. And the quote, I'll read it for you. I know you can read it on the screen. Traditionally employed post-payment recovery approaches to overpayment management can be augmented with prepayment solutions to achieve meaningful payment integrity. Friends, that is what we believe, and that is what we do, to say connect your ongoing PAR monitoring with at time of claim or at enrollment to say check every step of the way, not just one siloed process within your workflow. And so provider enrollment, right, just to run out just one of those, if you look at the first step of this, provider enrollment screening, provider screening and enrollment reduces recruitment later. What should this look like, right? So automation, integration into your enrollment process, and include all the appropriate sources for the population that you're screening, right? So certainly this is back to close the loop on where we started. All exclusions sources, the SSA DMF, Medicare opt-out, CMS ordering and referring sources, FDA DEA, the preclusion list. How do you build a workflow and a compliance check at every step and an appropriate step of the workflow where it can really add value? And so we gave a takeaway for our provider friends and for our payer friends. Here's a similar takeaway for you that's custom for you. Number one is, are you doing exclusion monitoring in-house or working with a vendor? And then within that is, are you manually verifying potential exclusions if either of those are true? 2 is how often do you screen your provider network for exclusions? Are you doing so monthly? Are you doing so quarterly? Are you doing so at time of enrollment or contracting? Are you doing so daily? And is it more business process oriented? 3 is how accurate is your provider network data? Which identifying data are you collecting about your providers and how are you validating that? Are you implementing blockchain technology as part of an ongoing data validation strategy? Are you incorporating the results of that strategy directly into your claims processing? 4 is how are exclusions communicated across teams and how quickly does this occur, especially on the health plan side. The key to limiting overpayments and reducing recovery efforts is speed to resolution and how fast you can catch and verify. And 5 is, do multiple teams have access to exclusion monitoring reports? Are there regular cross-functional meetings about exclusion insights, right? Very similar to what we would advocate for on the provider side as well. And so really what we would advocate for is a partnership strategy between either internal departments at your organization or with the right vendors. So certainly we talk about this because it's our passion. It's what we believe. It's what we're driven to go achieve, is to actually keep healthcare safe and make it smarter at the same time. Would actually encourage you to ask yourselves, is that a point of view that you share? And if so, do your partnerships share that point of view as well?
Thanks, Dave. Christina, Dave, thank you so much for being with us today. And I would like to also take the time to thank everyone on the call. We really appreciate you choosing to spend your time with Provider Trust. We know your time is valuable, and we just really appreciate the time. So a couple notes before we sign off today. You will receive a copy of the presentation as well as a recording this afternoon, and then your CEUs will be coming shortly. And we will have, we'll talk to everybody in January about this is our final webinar for the year. So we'll talk to you guys in January about our webinars through March. So you'll be able to plan for that as well. So on behalf of everyone here at Provider Trust, I would just like to say thank you one more time and hope you guys have a great rest of the year.